Hello students, I am Dr. Aruna Mohan from University of Delhi, and today in this session we shall discuss about mechanism of muscle contraction. In previous sessions we have discussed about muscle, about nerve, about functioning and the structure of a muscle cell. Whenever we talk of contraction, that means muscle is in action. And when muscle will be in action? When it is stimulated. And how it will be stimulated? By nerve fiber. That means stimulation comes to central nervous system and then takes message by motor neuron to muscle. That will also mean that stimulus will come through sensory neuron and will be sent back with the message by motor neuron. Hence, when we talk of mechanism of muscle contraction, we shall start the discussion with central nervous system. From central nervous system will come or start the motor neuron, which is bringing the message, and definitely this motor neuron will bring message to the muscle fiber. Now, in this context, this motor neuron and this muscle fiber in question is called motor unit. Please remember children, this muscle fiber is going to get message from this motor neuron which is coming from central nervous system. Neuron is a nerve cell basically. When this neuron ends on muscle tissue or muscle fiber, it makes a junction which we call neuromuscular junction. As the name indicates, neuro, that is part of nervous system, muscular, that is part of muscular system. So, neuromuscular junction where nerve is meeting muscle. This junction is very important. This nerve is ending onto the muscle cell at neuromuscular junction, which is also known as motor end plate. Motor word is coming from motor neuron and the end of neuron, and plate, it is making a small plate like structure or a small solid structure. So, we call it motor end plate. In other words, neuromuscular junction can also be called motor end plate. Now, what is the purpose of this motor end plate? The nerve which is innervating a particular muscle cell will end at one point where it is entering the muscle cell, but that is not end of muscle cell also. Muscle cell is quite long, quite big. So, innervation has to reach each and every part of muscle cell, or you can say the sarcoplasm, cytoplasm of muscle cell is called sarcoplasm, and membrane, the cell membrane of muscle cell is called sarcolemma. So, this innervation has to go through sarcoplasm. How will it go? And that is the reason why this motor end plate is formed, and from this will come small channels will come out, and they will now innervate the total sarcoplasm of this muscle cell or muscle fiber. So, children, try to understand this point one more time. The motor neuron or motor nerve cell which started from central nervous system ended on muscle cell in the form of neuromuscular junction or motor end plate, and eventually innervated the whole muscle cell. Now, after knowing this, we will try to understand the mechanism of muscle contraction. The muscle is going to contract under the action of motor neuron. So, what motor neuron is doing when it is carrying stimulus to the muscle cell? This motor neuron, when it is ending onto the muscle cell, will release a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. Dear students, you have already learnt about neurotransmitters, which can be acetylcholine in cholinergic fibers and adrenaline in case of adrenergic fiber. This time the muscle fiber we are discussing is cholinergic. So, neurotransmitter which is released is acetylcholine. Now, this acetylcholine will generate action potential. You also know what action potential is. We have discussed about this also in previous sessions. Now, once the action potential is generated, it will cause production of calcium ions within the muscle. Now, these calcium ions will bind with actin filament, will make the point where it is binding, and it will do one more work. It will remove the masking effect on myosin fiber. Now, myosin head, which is not having any masking effect at the moment because of calcium availability, this myosin head will try to make a contact with those gaps on actin fiber which are created by calcium availability. So, calcium availability is so important, and that is why it is said that growing children should take milk in order to have calcium, because they have to grow their muscles and bones. Now, in the presence of calcium, myosin head will bind with actin filament, and now muscle will contract. How that will happen? We are going to see in the next slide in the diagram. You can see the actin filament and you can see myosin filament with a head. The myosin filament is trying to touch the actin filament when calcium is available after it is stimulated, and it will try to move. You can see in the diagram, first it is touching straight and then it is bending towards the left side. That means the muscle is contracted that much, and after contraction is over, it will detach and the muscle will come to the original position. I would like to explain this one more time. Actin filament is there which is stimulated by calcium ions. The sites where calcium touched the actin filament, those sites are available for myosin head, because masking effect on myosin is removed by calcium. Now, this head will make contact with actin. Myosin making contact with actin filament is very important for contracting the muscle. Our purpose is to contract the muscle and later it will be relaxed. So, once myosin head touches actin and then it bends to one side, in this case the left side, that means that much of muscle is moved towards left, or that much muscle has undergone contraction or shortening of the size. Whenever muscle contracts, it will shorten in the size, and when this myosin head separates from actin filament, it acquires the normal direction and normal position away from actin, and at that time the muscle fiber will relax and lengthen. That means, it will come to normal length of the muscle cell. So, that is the relaxation of muscle. So, in short, how contraction took place, the mechanism of contraction of muscle. Innervation came through motor neuron to the muscle cell through neuromuscular junction or motor end plate. The muscle cell was innervated, action potential was generated due to production of acetylcholine, and actin filament was stimulated, the sites were formed, and masking effect on myosin was removed. Myosin head touched those sites on actin filament, start bending on one side, and that was muscle was shortening in size to one side, and that was contraction, and reverse is going to be the relaxation. So, this is how the contraction of muscle goes on. It is very complex process, but it normally goes on normally in the body. We move on to the next slide. So far what we have discussed in mechanism of muscle contraction can also be called cross bridge formation in muscle contraction. Why we call it cross bridge formation? Because a bridge is formed between actin and myosin when they attach or join each other. This is part of mechanism of contraction of muscle and also muscle contraction theory, which we are going to deal again in the next slide. Sliding filament theory is a theory of mechanism of muscle contraction. Part of it we have understood in the cross bridge theory, which is also part of sliding filament theory, hence the mechanism of muscle contraction theory. So, we have understood the cross bridge theory. Now, in this diagram, we will see how muscle is contracting. In the first, the upper diagram, you can see it is relaxed stage. You can see the position of band 1, band 2, H zone and actin filaments and myosin filaments. And you will know what is happening in these filaments when it is innervated. In the second diagram below, you can see the contracted face of the muscle and you can see the movement of I band and also the position of H zone. Things will come closer because it is the contracted condition. That means the actin and myosin filaments, which are arranged band by band, and when they join by cross bridge, they definitely lead to contraction. So, by these two diagrams, the matter is very clear that actin, then myosin, again myosin filaments are arranged in this fashion in the muscle fiber. And when they are making cross bridge, definitely they are coming closer to each other, and when they are coming closer to each other, it is a contracted condition, and when they are going little away from each other, because the contact between myosin head and actin filament is lost, then it is relaxed condition. So, this is how the mechanism of muscle contraction goes on in our body by sliding filament theory and by cross bridge formation. Now, we have studied how one muscle fiber will contract when there is one nerve stimulation. That was the case of one action, one stimulation, one contraction. Suppose there is repeated activation of muscle. You know children, when we are doing variety of things, so many muscles we are contracting simultaneously or repeatedly. Now, if we are using one particular muscle in a repeated way, or we are giving repeated activation of the muscle, the kind of activation which we have just now discussed in case of one muscle fiber, then what will happen? Let me first give you one example. Suppose you are cycling or you are jogging for quite some time, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, then you get tired, you get aches in the or pains in the leg. Why that happens? When there is repeated activation of muscle, then there is accumulation of lactic acid. Why lactic acid accumulated? Because for some time there was an anaerobic breakdown of glycogen. Normally we have aerobic breakdown, but when you are needing so much of energy in such a short time and repeated time, then there is an aerobic condition available there in the muscle and it will release lactic acid, and this lactic acid will accumulate in those areas where you were contracting muscle again and again, and this will result into fatigue. And when you rest for some time, the lactic acid will mobilize. And also one more point, myoglobin is present in a muscle cell which stores oxygen. It is oxygen storing pigment in your muscle, so that when you are using muscle repeatedly, you have more of oxygen available to you. Because of this pigment, the muscle looks reddish in color, and also we can call red fiber, and some muscles have less of this myoglobin, that is called white muscle fiber. Today we have discussed about mechanism of muscle contraction, cross bridge theory, sliding filament theory, and also we have discussed about neuromuscular junction, motor end plate, neurotransmitter, and how muscle contracts and how it relaxes. With this, we come to the end of this session. Thank you.